People used to say my dad was a quiet man. They meant it as a compliment, stoic, strong, dependable. But when you're his daughter, and the whole family treats you like a failure, silence doesn't feel noble. It feels like betrayal. I'm Maribel Quinn. I'm the middle child, the one who didn't graduate college, didn't marry young, didn't give my parents any grandbabies to brag about at reunions. I work at a local cafe, pay my rent on time, and live a life that, to them, probably looks like a series of missed milestones. I never expected much from family gatherings, just the usual, awkward glances, polite insults disguised as small talk, and my mom pretending I wasn't really there. But at our last reunion, something happened that stopped everyone cold. For the first time in my life, my father spoke up, and not just to anyone, to the whole room. And what he said changed everything. When I was 10, I learned how to wash dishes without making a sound. That was the trick. If you moved quietly enough, maybe they'd forget you were there. And most days, that felt like a win. My older sister, Vanessa, had a room full of blue ribbons and certificates, her name announced proudly at every school assembly. My younger brother, Jack, had dimples, charm, and a soccer trophy shelf that Dad built himself. Then there was me, sandwiched in between, neither brilliant nor adorable. Just Maribel, the quiet one. I wasn't rebellious. I didn't sneak out, didn't get in trouble. But I also didn't shine. I liked art, cooking, wandering the aisles of the library, and writing stories I never showed anyone. The things I loved didn't come with medals or straight-A report cards. Dinner was a nightly performance of praise and plans. Vanessa talked about her college prep classes, while Jack bragged about his game stats. Mom would beam and chime in, "That's my girl," or "That's my boy." Then she'd glance my way with a smile that never reached her eyes and ask, "Did you do your homework?" Not because she cared, just so she could check the box. Dad sat at the head of the table, quiet, nodding. He rarely offered an opinion, rarely intervened. I studied his face so many times, trying to read something, anything, that said he saw me. But his eyes always went back to his plate or the evening news. Mom had a way of turning judgment into sound advice. If you'd just apply yourself, if you weren't so distracted with nonsense, people respect results, Maribel, not effort. She didn't yell. That would have been easier. Her voice was soft, firm, full of that exhausting disappointment that lingers in a room even after she's left it. Once I overheard her telling a neighbor, "Some kids just take longer to figure it out." I knew she meant me. Birthdays came and went. I baked my own cakes because no one remembered what flavor I liked. Holidays were worse. Every year, I brought a pie or a tray of cookies, hoping someone would ask for the recipe. They never did. Vanessa's fiancé got praised for buying an expensive wine. Jack was teased about how all the girls at church stared at him. And me? Still working at that little diner? Maybe you should go back to school. At least you're not just sitting around doing nothing. I laughed along. What else was I supposed to do? But those words sank in, layer after layer, until I started to believe them. Maybe I was small. Maybe I was forgettable. Maybe I was the one who fell short, again and again. The worst part wasn't the comments, it was the absence. The empty space where encouragement should have been. The missing, "I'm proud of you." The silence. When I was 16, I worked double shifts in the summer to save up for a community college course in baking. When I told my mom, she frowned. "Maybe you should consider something more useful, like accounting." Dad looked up from his paper and said, "If it makes her happy." That was the closest I got to approval. I clung to that sentence for months. If it makes her happy. It wasn't enthusiastic, but it wasn't rejection either. It was neutral, tolerant, and in my world, that felt almost like love. Years passed. I moved out, got an apartment, paid my own bills. The cafe I worked at gave me the morning shifts, and the regulars knew me by name. I wasn't doing anything flashy, but I had peace, and that counted for something, even if my family never asked what my days looked like. Then, about a year ago, something unexpected happened. I brought a birthday cake to Mom's house. Not a boxed one. I'd spent 2 days on it. Almond sponge, raspberry filling, buttercream roses. She barely glanced at it before rushing to take a call. But Dad lingered in the kitchen, a mug of black coffee in hand. He cut a slice, took a bite, and said, "You bake like your grandmother. She used to make a cake just like this." I froze. "Did you like it?" I asked. He nodded. "I did. Your grandma would have been proud." That line hit me harder than I expected. Not because he praised the cake, but because for once he said something that felt real, personal, like he remembered something about me, about us. I waited for more. He didn't say anything else, but that small exchange stayed with me. It was the first time I thought, maybe he sees me. I didn't know it then, but that moment was a crack in the wall, a tiny fracture in years of silence. And eventually it would break wide open. The invitation came on a Tuesday, tucked inside a floral card that smelled faintly of perfume. I almost threw it away. Quinn Family Reunion. This Sunday, backyard BBQ. Bring a dish to share. At the bottom, written in Mom's neat script, "We'd love to see you there. It's been too long." Too long since what? Since they last pretended I didn't exist? Since Mom told her friends I was between jobs while I'd been clocking double shifts for months? I left the card on the kitchen counter for 2 days before I decided to go. Not because I wanted to, but because I was tired of running. Maybe part of me still hoped for something different. I made lemon bars. They were my grandmother's recipe. I cut each one clean, topped them with powdered sugar, and placed them neatly on a tray. Presentation, I told myself. If they weren't going to listen to me, they could at least taste something that mattered. I wore a clean sundress and flat shoes. I curled my hair, added lip gloss. Not because I needed their approval, but because I deserved to feel like I belonged, even if no one else believed it. When I walked into the backyard, it was already loud. Laughter, music, the sound of kids splashing in a blow-up pool, and then the usual chorus. "Vanessa! You look incredible! Oh, Jack, you've grown into such a fine young man." And then, when they saw me, a pause, a few nods, one awkward hug, and that strange familiar silence that always wrapped itself around me like plastic wrap, clear, tight, suffocating. "Maribel," Aunt Colleen said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes, "you made it. We weren't sure you'd come." I smiled back. Neither was I. I set my lemon bars on the dessert table beside Vanessa's store-bought cupcakes. No one looked twice. Mom appeared behind me, dabbing her forehead with a cloth napkin. "You could have brought something with fruit," she said softly. "There are too many sweets already." I said nothing. I had expected it. That little sting disguised as feedback. That whisper of disapproval. The afternoon dragged. Jack gave a toast about family values, quoting something he read on LinkedIn. Vanessa passed around photos of her new baby, and everyone cooed as if they'd never seen an infant before. I stayed near the lemonade jug, watching ice melt, nodding when people made comments they didn't expect me to respond to. Then it came. "Still working at that cafe?" Uncle Rich asked, reaching for a rib. "I hear tips are good, on weekends." I smiled tight. "It's a diner, and yeah, I do all right." His wife leaned in. "At least you're not one of those girls just sitting at home. You're doing something, and that counts." I wanted to say, "Why does it feel like you think I'm scraping gum off sidewalks for pennies?" But I just nodded again, letting the shame settle in like it always did, familiar and sharp. Later, someone passed around a photo album. Baby pictures, graduations, weddings. I flipped through it absent-mindedly, until I realized something. I wasn't in any of them, not one. I stood there, frozen, my fingers resting on a page filled with smiles and caps and gowns and matching family shirts at Disneyland. But no Maribel, not even in the background. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I picked up my purse, turned toward the gate, and just as my hand reached the latch, "Where are you going?" It was my father's voice. Not loud, but firm. My spine straightened instinctively. "I have things to do," I said. "And I don't think I belong here anyway." He looked at me, really looked, and then turned toward the rest of the yard. And then he spoke. Loud, clear, no microphone, just his voice slicing through the air like a knife. Can I have everyone's attention for a second? People turned. Conversations quieted. Forks paused midair. Dad stepped toward the center of the yard. His shoulders, always a little slouched, now squared. His gaze moved across each face. His siblings, his children, his wife, and landed last on me. I want to say something, he began, because I've realized I've waited too long to say it. He held up his lemonade cup like a toast. I'm proud of all my children. There was a beat of silence. Someone coughed. He continued, not just the ones with degrees, not just the ones with weddings and mortgages and photo albums. I'm proud of all my kids, because life isn't about appearances, it's about character. And Maribel, he turned toward me, has more of that than anyone here. The air cracked open. She's worked since she was 16, paid off debts that weren't hers, helped neighbors without asking for thanks. She shows up, every day, for everyone, including this family, even when we didn't show up for her. I couldn't move. I barely breathed. I should have said this a long time ago, he said, quieter now. But I was wrong to be silent. Silence can be crueler than words, and I'm sorry for that. His voice trembled. He raised his cup higher. To Maribel. No one clapped. No one had a time. Because I was crying. And I didn't care who saw. After the toast, something subtle shifted in the air. Not just around me, but within me. The reunion didn't explode into applause or turn into some magical reconciliation. No one ran to hug me. No one cried. Instead, people sort of scattered, like ants after someone nudges the hill. A few offered awkward smiles. A couple gave me a side pat on the arm, as if unsure whether to comfort or congratulate. And honestly, that was fine, because I wasn't doing this for them. I found a seat under the shade of a tree, plate in hand, barely touched. My stomach was tight with adrenaline and confusion. My dad's words kept playing in my mind, over and over, like a song I didn't know I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. He had said my name, in front of them, with pride. It sounds simple, I know. But when you've spent your life being the background blur in everyone else's highlight reel, being acknowledged feels like a revolution. Later, when the sun began to fall, and most guests were packing up, I wandered toward the patio where Dad was sitting alone, his lemonade cup nearly empty. He didn't look surprised to see me, just tired. Not the bad kind of tired, more like he had finally put something heavy down. I think you scared them, I said, half joking. He smiled without teeth. Maybe it was time they heard something worth remembering. We sat in silence for a while. But this silence was different. It didn't hum with shame or avoidance. It was calm, present. I almost left, I admitted. I know, he said. I saw you reaching for the gate. I couldn't let you go without saying it. I looked at him, really looked. For the first time in years, he seemed human, not the untouchable man behind the newspaper or the quiet observer at every dinner, but someone who felt things too, someone who had carried guilt as quietly as I'd carried hurt. I thought you didn't care, I whispered. He took a long breath. I was afraid caring out loud would just make things harder for you. Or worse, make them harder for your mother. I raised an eyebrow. And Mom's comfort was more important than mine? No, he said, shaking his head slowly. But I got used to keeping peace by keeping quiet. Turns out, silence can be just as damaging as shouting. That sentence landed hard. It echoed every moment I'd wished someone, anyone, would have spoken up for me. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out something small, a folded napkin. Inside it, one of my lemon bars. They were good, he said, half smiling. Your grandma would have approved. We laughed a little, soft, shaky, but it felt good. The next day, I received a text from my mom, short, blunt, but not cold. Send me the recipe. No compliment, no acknowledgement of what had happened, but still an opening. D finally, seen. And then, that evening, Vanessa sent me a picture. It was taken during Dad's toast. I was in the frame, standing near the gate, my eyes wide, my hands clutched together, and he was in the center, cup raised, looking right at me. The caption read, "You should be in more of these. That surprised me. Not because she suddenly transformed into a loving sister, but because maybe, just maybe, something in her shifted too. The days after the reunion were oddly quiet. Not in a bad way. It was like the noise had dulled. I went back to the cafe. My regulars asked about the weekend, and I just smiled. I didn't tell them the whole story, but I didn't brush it off either. I started drawing again. Not just recipes or cake ideas, but real things. Portraits, scenes, memories I'd kept locked away. One night, while organizing a drawer, I found an old photo of me and Dad at a county fair. I was 8, holding a giant cotton candy, and he had one hand on my shoulder. I hadn't remembered the picture being taken, but the expression on his face? Calm, watchful, like he was making sure I didn't drift too far away. And maybe that's what he'd been doing all along. Watching, waiting, not knowing how to step in. Maybe he wasn't the protector I wanted, but he was the one I had. And in the end, he showed up, when it mattered most. A week later, we had lunch, just the two of us. He ordered a BLT. I got soup. We talked about small things, the weather, the cafe, his cholesterol. But before we parted, he said, "You know, I'm not good with speeches." I smiled. "You did all right." He reached for his wallet, pulled out a small piece of paper, and handed it to me. It was the recipe, written in his handwriting. "Your lemon bars. I'm making them for poker night." I blinked, caught between laughter and tears. "They're not going to believe you made those." He grinned. "I'll let them think I bought them." That's the thing about family. Sometimes healing doesn't come with big dramatic moments or perfect apologies. Sometimes it comes in the form of a quiet lunch, a folded napkin, a shared dessert. I'm not saying everything's perfect now. Mom still slips in the occasional jab disguised as concern. Vanessa still doesn't really know how to talk to me without mentioning her kids. Jack is Jack. But I'm no longer waiting for them to change in order to feel whole. Because I changed. And that's the difference. I no longer measure my worth by how often I'm included in family albums or holiday speeches. I know who I am, I know what I bring, and I know that even quiet daughters deserve to take up space. So here I am, loud in my own way, present, unapologetic. And looking back, I used to think recognition had to be loud, public, undeniable, wrapped in fanfare. I thought that being seen meant being praised at the table, featured in every photo, introduced with pride. But now I know better. Being seen can be quiet. It can come in a glance, a sentence, a folded napkin holding a lemon bar. It can sound like, "I'm proud of you," said with a voice that used to only echo silence. That moment at the reunion didn't undo years of being overlooked. It didn't erase every snide comment or every time I sat at the edge of a family photo, smiling like I belonged while wondering if I did. But it did something else, something better. It gave me permission. Permission to stop shrinking. Permission to speak, even if my voice shakes. Permission to define my worth by my own measures, not theirs. My dad didn't raise his voice for attention. He raised it to lift a weight off both our shoulders. And in doing so, he gave me something I never thought I'd have. Validation not just as a daughter, but as a whole person. And once you've been seen, really seen, you start seeing yourself differently too. Now, I no longer flinch when someone asks where I work. I no longer dread reunions. If I go, it's because I choose to, not because I'm hoping someone will finally notice. I'm still baking, still working early mornings, still living a life that might look simple from the outside, but it's full, it's honest, it's mine. And to anyone else who's been the quiet one, the dismissed one, the overlooked one, you don't need to change who you are to earn love. You don't have to win anyone's approval to take up space. Sometimes, all it takes is one voice, yours or someone else's, to remind you that you were never invisible. You were just waiting for the light to hit you right. And now that it has, you don't ever have to disappear again.